Women of Reddit, what is your worst? A customer tried to hit on me at work story. I was stocking shelves on my knees. Man walks up and says, wish you'd get on your knees like that for me. I was 16. He was like 50. When I was 18 and working as a waitress, an older man came in and sat in my section. He gave extremely creepy/unsafe vibes right off the bat. He was one of those customers who would continue talking to you even when you were obviously trying to do your job. The way he leered was nauseating. He didn't try to hide it at all. He kept telling me how rich he was and to go look out the window at his car and that it cost $30,000 and he had another one like it. He also made plenty of very inappropriate jokes/inferences and would stick out his tongue, which was covered in what looked like white fuzz. Nasty, when he cackled at my obvious discomfort. I was growing increasingly annoyed at this point because he had just sat there for around 4 hours straight continuously trying to engage me in conversation while I was helping other customers and doing side work. Finally he left and I breathed a sigh of relief that such a grimy, objectifying presence had left. I had 2 jobs at this point and I went to my other shift working at Chipotle. Had a normal day until I shit you not, 10 minutes before close his car rolls up and he saunters in like he thinks he's John Wayne or something. He sidled up to the window where you order, waved his hand dismissively at my coworker who asked him what he'd like to order, and just walked straight up to me with this arrogant grin on his face. I deadpan asked him what he'd like to order. He looked annoyed and said I don't care, a Coke or something, so I rang him up for a Coke, handed him the cup, and started helping the next customer. I didn't show any sign of recognition or interest because I was pissed off at this point. I think he actually expected me to react to his presence or something. Anyway, he walked away in an insulted manner, filled his cup with Coke, took a sip, and slowly poured it into the trash while staring directly at me. It took me about an hour to close the lobby, which, goody, had an entire wall of just windows/2 glass doors where the whole parking lot could see inside. He sat in the closest parking spot 2 feet away from the entrance, waiting behind his tinted windows, for the entire hour until I was done. By this point I had informed my manager of the situation and everyone was creeped out. I would usually walk home but my manager said hell no and told me to call someone to pick me up and everyone stayed with me until my brother arrived. When my brother pulled up and got out right next to his passenger door, I'm sure this crusty old man was confused why some 6-foot-tall bodybuilding-looking dude was going into Chipotle after it was closed. Everyone stared him down, or where we imagined he would be behind the tinted windows, as I walked out and got into my brother's car. We started to pull out and suddenly his engine roars and he abruptly and carelessly swerves inches in front of our bumper. He faced us with his car for a whole minute, revving his engine, before speeding away. I never ran into him again, thank God, folded hands, but I swear I still shudder when I think about the way he made me feel that night. I was working as a technician at an Apple reseller and was just coming in from my break. I saw a man seated in the waiting area and said, "Give me a couple minutes, sir. I'll be right with you," and he nodded politely. I go in the back, take off my coat and go up to the service desk. For context, I'm a heavier girl who's quite well endowed in the chest area. This 70-year-old man looked at my cleavage and said, "Wow, you sure got a lot of tit on you, girl." I straight up didn't even know what to say since that never happened to me in a professional context. It happened again 3 days later, a woman this time, and my team coach and his coach laughed it off. I took it to HR and made a thing out of it. Eventually they both apologized and I said I'd refuse to ever service that man again and if they made me, they could find a new technician. 600. I was working at the funeral home as a director and embalmer. A young man, who from what I could tell lived a rough lifestyle, had died. His family and friends were gathered in the chapel and I was in the lobby, in my black suit buttoned up to my earlobes with my hair pulled back. I feel it's necessary to say how unsexy I looked. One of the deceased's friends, a young man, approached me and started small talk. In the course of this conversation he told me that for the last funeral he went to, which I also directed, he and his buddies had stolen several vehicles in order to make it in time. I politely nodded when he added, "You gotta get where you're going, you know?" He then proceeded to ask if I had a card, which I provided as it was on a stand right next to me. He then asked if the number on said card was my cell phone number. He was disappointed when I said no, and again when I said no to giving him said number. I had a guy demand to know my schedule so he said he could come in every time I worked so he could ask me out until I said yes. I also had a man hit on me while coming in with his wife/girlfriend and 3 of their kids. She took them to the bathroom and he asked for my number. I'm pretty sure the worst was these 2 men who we are pretty sure were sex traffickers. I had already been warned by another co-worker they tried to force her outside by cornering her in the lobby. They asked me all sorts of weird questions like what ethnicity I was, did I have family, etc., and then stared at me the entire time they were at their table. I made sure I wasn't up at the hostess stand alone. I worked at a fishing and tackle store when I was 18-21 and have had heaps of older guys get grabby. The worst, though, was an older guy who seemed really normal. I'm gonna call him Joe. He had a couple of daughters who were my age and they would all come in and get their gear before heading out on their boat. I'd run into him while at my fishing spot and we would always chat, and a couple of times my boss and I had gone out on his boat to fish for marlin ages from the coast. Then he invited me to go fishing with him and his daughters out at a spot a few hours from town. Said we would go stay at his property out there and then spend the next day fishing and catching snapper. He was a nice guy, and I'd known him for a while now, so why not? I told my boyfriend where I was going and said I would be back the next day. Joe picks me up and his daughters weren't with him. They were already at his property and he came into town to pick me up and grab some food for the trip. We get to his property and his daughters aren't there. Turns out they weren't coming after all, and now I'm alone with Joe about 4 hours from the nearest town. My danger meter is on high alert by this time. He ended up drugging and raping me that night. I remember bits of it but not much. Then he left me there. 4 hours by car from civilization. With no phone reception. I walked for hours until a truck driver saw me and gave me a lift to town so I could call my boyfriend to come pick me up. Thankfully I never saw Joe or his daughters again. Sat outside the door of the small clothing store I worked at waiting for 4 hours staring at me. My shift ended. My manager said if he says or does anything you come right back inside. Sure enough, dude gets up and starts making a move as soon as I step out. As I go back into the store, manager comes barreling out with a baseball bat. Best boss ever. I was a hostess at a restaurant during the slower shift of mornings with maybe a lunch rush. I had this guy come in for lunch almost every Monday with some co-workers. He was probably in his 40s, seemed like a normal guy, gave me a side hug a time or two but he seemed harmless. When he found out I quit he found me on FB and messaged me some weird message that ended with something along the lines of, like the good girl you are. I didn't ever respond, but it wasn't maybe 2 months later I see his mugshot on the local news for child porn charges and seducing minors. A consulting client hit on me in a very Asian fetishy way over a business dinner. He let slip during that same dinner that he frequently vacationed in SE Asia. I was in my early 20s at the time but looked very small and young. My boss asked me to excuse the incident since I would never have to see the guy again anyway, but I knew something wasn't right. Guess who got arrested for possession of child porn a year later? Came in for my night shift and a patient was palliative, so I go in the room with the day nurse to introduce myself to the family and evaluate the patient. The son of the patient was at least 45 and smelled like he had been drinking. He said something like, "I'm glad mom has such a hot nurse with her tonight." Absolutely vile. Like, sir, your mother is dying 5 feet away. When I was 17 working in a retail store at a mall, some 40/50ths of a year-old man came in about a half hour to close. He obsessively followed me around the store asking me all sorts of questions. How long you worked here? How old are you? What school do you go to? Etc. etc. He started making comments about how my body is too grown and that I was teasing him because he can't have me since I was too young. He casually mentioned that his daughter went to my school and was in my grade. I asked him who she was and he said, "Now I'm not that stupid. If you found that out then she'd tell her mother. We've been together 20 years and I'm not gonna lose that." I wish I remembered more of what he said because it was so vile that I cried for the rest of my shift in the bathroom. My manager was right next to me the whole time and she did absolutely nothing because she wanted to reach our sales goal. I hope that man rots in hell and that his marriage is ruined. I once waited on a 4-top, 2 hetero couples, probably around early 50s. They were fun and silly, but the men quickly turned flirty. They said they weren't from in town and when I asked them where they were from and where they were headed, they said they were making their yearly pilgrimage to a nudist retreat. Now I'm not one to judge, so I said oh that's cool, which seemed to be where I made the mistake. Near the end of the meal, the older of the 2 men hands me an address and says to meet them at the retreat for a guaranteed good time and that I'd know who they were because they'd all be naked except for straw hats. It was awkward lol. I worked at a sports bar with a couple bowling lanes / etc. in college. I ran the games as more of a hostess so I was allowed to wear what I wanted. I was really into wild shoes at the time, and I had on this fantastic pair of thigh-high gladiator sandals one night. There was a group of guys at the lanes for a birthday, The birthday boy was apparently the first to turn 40 and seemed a little bummed but was being flirty all night and I was playing into it, you know, working for that tip. He was bombed after an hour. I went up to check on them and he noticed my shoes and was like, "Wow, I love those, can I look at them?" So I was like sure, and I was gonna put my foot on a ledge all Captain Morgan like, but he literally pushed me, so I was sitting on a lounger and grabbed my leg and unzipped the shoe and like rubbed my leg. It was very foot fetishy, embarrassed smiley face. It happened so fast. But his friends all immediately jumped and grabbed him like, "WTFFFF, we are so sorry, he's so wasted, OMG." And my manager also immediately started walking over and made eye contact with me, so I wasn't really upset about it, just hella shocked. They did in fact leave an outrageous tip. That's the worst by far. I worked in a bar, so obviously people got flirty pretty often, but that guy was in a league of his own. When I was in my teens I worked at a grocery store near a thrift store. My co-workers and I would go thrifting after work, and one day this much older man is just there watching me try on clothes. I came out in this skin-tight red dress and he goes, "That looks amazing on you. It fits your body just right." I was like okay and brushed it off. A couple weeks later the man who was watching me and what seemed to be his wife come to my grocery store and through my line. He goes, "You were the girl at the thrift store with the red dress, you looked amazing," with his wife right there. She's just giving me this blank stare, and at this point I'm super creeped out cause this was weeks ago and he still remembered. I just give him a meek thank you and he keeps small talking me, asking what I'm doing after work and if I'll be back at the thrift store. I keep looking back at his wife who seemed totally tapped out, just staring me down. Honestly, she was creeping me out more than the guy. I just said I don't know, handed them their stuff, and took the next customer. I never went back to the thrift store. I was a swim instructor. A little kid was infatuated with me and during one of the lessons pulled my swimsuit down in the front. The parents got really angry that I flashed their children, like what was I supposed to do, let go of your child who can't swim just to pull my suit up? Obviously I fixed it as fast as I could, but I had to get the little kid to dry land first. Still one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. When I was 17 working at a coffee shop, I had a dude in his 40s 50s invite me to an erotica ball, basically a sex party. I worked at a boutique grocery store, and I'd get regulars that mistook my customer service banter with actual interest. One man was easily twice my age and would always follow me around talking at me vigorously while I worked. I was clearly busy and occasionally giving him a polite "oh wow" or "hey." After about 2 months of this, he finally mustered the courage to ask me on a hike. He stopped coming in after my rejection. Another man would do something similar. After a while he told me, while holding a gallon milk, "You know, I don't even need milk." I played dumb and said well, put it back then, and hustled to the back room. He stuck around after my shift, at night, and confessed he wanted my number and liked me. I feigned a phone call and never saw him again either. I used to work as a caregiver when I was 19 and I did a live-in assignment, 4 days straight 24 hours, and sadly my patient had dementia and Alzheimer's. Late one night, after I put her to bed and settled in myself, I was just about asleep and she stumbled into my room and stood at the foot of the bed I was in, just staring at me. I see her silhouette in the dark and I notice a baseball bat in her hand and she flicks on the light. I ask her quietly and nicely what she is doing and she starts screaming and swinging the bat at me and telling me to get out of her house and that I'm an intruder and I don't belong there, etc. I try showing her my name tag. I tried calling her son, he didn't pick up, it was late, and eventually I had to run away from her and out the front door in my pajamas and lock myself in the car in 40-degree weather. She called 911 and I'm so glad because I was terrified outside in the dark out in the middle of nowhere, locked out of the house without my phone or anything, with a lady trying to defend herself against me, her caregiver. When the cops got there I was so relieved. I explained everything and they stayed with her till her son came so I could gather my stuff and leave. I felt like staying there, I couldn't sleep, and I was in harm's way. I was super young, I shouldn't have been on that job without proper training. The summer after I graduated high school I worked in the merchandise department of a theme park. I was folding t-shirts with one of those t-shirt folder things Sheldon had in The Big Bang Theory. This guy in his 50s was just standing by the counter, and said, "That looks pretty handy." I said, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna take this thing home with me and do my laundry with it." He got real close up to the counter and goes, "How about I take you home with me, have you do my laundry for me?" I worked in a doctor's office and we had a patient who needed to sign a consent form for HIV testing. He comes up to the desk and says, "When my HIV test comes back negative, you wanna go see a movie or something?" No. Another time at this bakery, a very good-looking guy came up to me and asked about his order. I was like, "UHH, we bring it to you." I could tell he wanted to talk, but I was so taken back by this good-looking man trying to talk to me that I just froze. Regrets on that one. Again, not the answer you were looking for. But, regrets. I was cocktail waitressing and a man reached up my skirt and grabbed my lady bits. I hit him with my tray but he wasn't hurt. I told my bouncers and they took him in the back alley and didn't come back for about 15 minutes. I never saw that customer again. Pro tip, always take care of your bouncers. A guy on OkCupid was messaging with me and I mentioned I worked at a sex shop. He asked me if it was this particular sex shop in his neighborhood and it actually was. Then he asked if I'd recommend anything in particular, and I said Tenga eggs were good. A few days later he came into the store, went up to me and asked where he could find the Tenga eggs, but I was at work and pretty busy/stressed so I didn't realize it was the same guy until after he'd already left, apparently deflated that I didn't recognize him. He could have just been like, I'm that guy from OkCupid, but apparently that didn't occur to him. I worked at a bar. So many people think that you're there to ogle, and that if you're nice you are interested in them. I had a few guys come in one night that were non-stop talking about me and my body. These guys are sitting at the bar, 5 feet away from where I'm working and talking very loudly. The worst of the group kept calling me mommy. I got so fed up with it that I turned around and looked the dude in the face. I said, I don't remember pushing a 40-year-old man out of my vagina. This shit stops, or you get to leave. They were nice as pie after that, luckily. Man tried telling me his son was single etc. I just smiled it off and nodded and continued taking their orders. When I came back to give them their drinks, I slightly leaned over to put his drink on the table and he put his hand around me and only my hip/bum. I just put down the drink and marched off and had a cry in the back room lol. Old man in a nursing home tried to give me a hickey while I was putting his knee brace on. No, he didn't have dementia. Just a creepy old man. I was about 16 when this happened. A customer came in and said he recognized me and that I went to school with his daughter, and then proceeded to ask for my number and try to convince me to go out with him. Creepy guys would come in all the time, but this guy knew how old I was, which made it that much worse for me. Didn't happen to me, but to someone I worked with. When I was 18 I was working at a local Starbucks with a few other kids my age. This other guy who had quit just a few days before a new girl joined came in, made an order and said to her, "Hey, I used to work here. If I knew you'd be working here I'd never have quit. Your shift ends at 6, right? I know all of the shift timings here. I'll wait here for you after work if you want to hang out with me." She didn't know him at all. He was kinda forceful about getting her to spend some time with him and it was real creepy. We would be serving customers while he would hang around waiting for a chance to keep asking her out. She quit not long after and told the rest of us he had been stalking her from school to her house. That happened about 2 years ago, so I was 22 at the time, but looked younger. I was getting this guy's info and I asked about his marital status and this 46-year-old stranger grabbed my hand, winked and said, "Divorcing soon." I was 17 working fast food. This guy came up and asked for my number. I was intimidated and didn't want to make him mad, so I gave him a fake one. He came in multiple times the next few days, but luckily I had coworkers that were willing to keep me hidden in the back when he was there. About 5 days later I get a message request on Instagram. He'd saw my first name on my name tag and found my Insta with just that. I had a private Instagram and nothing that said where I worked in my bio, but this man sent me a message lecturing me about lying and giving him a fake number and calling me a tease because my work pants were provocative. They were just black jeans. His Instagram was public. He was 26 and lecturing a 17-year-old who was uncomfortable with an adult man and his friend bombarding her at work and giving them a fake number. While I was on my way to work, a creepy old bus driver kept commenting on how he would have liked to kiss me when he was younger and how I probably wouldn't want to kiss an old man like him. He kept waiting for me to argue and tell him that I wanted to kiss him. My girlfriend and I worked at the same McDonald's. The amount of times she got hit on while I was on shift, let alone in general, was infuriating. She got told she looks like a porn star and got asked if she had any hidden tattoos countless times. It got to a point I refused to serve the customers that talked to her that way. I would even hit on them jokingly from time to time, saying things like, "You sure you want her?" Nothing more manly than some man-to-man. Needless to say, they got uncomfortable quick and never showed up again. There was a guy, probably 20 years older than me. I was about 21. He came in not infrequently and was always friendly. Sometimes he would come in with his young daughter, about 4 years old. One time, he came in with her and it was slow, so I was playing games with his daughter and talking to her while he shopped and chatted. I grew up around nieces and nephews and have always loved kids. Eventually they check out and leave. My coworker relieves me and I go take my break. Eventually, my coworker comes into the back room and says that a customer wants to see me. I open the door and it's the guy with his daughter. He came back to tell me that his daughter didn't want him to tell me, but she told him that she wished I would marry her dad. I had no clue what to say to that, so there was just an awkward silence while the daughter looked uncomfortable, I looked uncomfortable, and the dad looked really pleased with himself. Almost made me miss the guys that came in to shop for lingerie for their girlfriends and asked if I'd model it for them while I was stuck there pulling the sizes they needed down from the wall. At least they were gross without involving their daughter in it. In my teens and early 20s I worked in the after-school program at the Boys and Girls Club. Most activity leaders were female, but there was an occasional male. At the end of each day approved parents and guardians would come into the cafeteria to sign out their child or children. After a while we knew who was associated with which child and there were never any surprises. One day a man we had never seen came in and sat at a back table. Didn't say anything, just sat. One of my female co-workers approached him and asked who he was there to pick up. He said, "Don't worry, I'm just waiting for my name." My male coworker made the instant decision to kick the creep out, close the doors and stand outside by himself to usher parents in one by one after that. To this day I still don't know who that man was or why he was waiting for me, but I am so grateful to my protective co-worker. When I started at my job I was about 21. I worked at an optical chain and I'd conduct the pre-exams before you saw the eye doc. So I was walking with this guy who was 50 and his 18-year-old son came along him. Well, I was making small talk, asking about his day, asking about his eye health, etc. Well then this 50-year-old man, in front of his son, starts telling me how beautiful I am. I thank him but then he starts telling me that if he were around my age, he'd totally hit on me and I would like it. I felt so uncomfortable, I quickly finished up the pre-test and told my boss I was not going to help him out when he was done the doc and to please keep him away from me. His son was also pretty embarrassed and just stayed quiet. When I was a sophomore in college I worked in a mall. There was a guy my age who would come in and lurk. It was a Hallmark store and he never bought anything. Just sat behind card racks and stared. He asked me out 2 times. I said no thank you both times. He would sit outside the storefront on the bench for hours. Eventually he recognized my car and started following me around town. He would bother my boyfriend at work. That fall, a woman from the store next door went missing. She was abducted from the parking lot. Her body was found later in another state. The perpetrator was eventually caught. Even after all that, the young guy who followed me still thought it was okay to linger in the store and follow me around. One night I noticed him while I was closing and called security. They asked him to leave and then came to walk me to my vehicle. The security guard said, "Maybe you've misinterpreted his actions. He wanted to ask you out." No sir, I most definitely did not misinterpret. I worked to go at a big restaurant that specializes in cheesecakes. The to-go section is next to the bar and this dude in a Jimmy Buffett parrot shirt comes in and sits on the end closest to me. I didn't deal with dine-in customers so I ignored him and let the bartender get it. Well, he stops me after like 10 minutes and asks me to get him some bread. I said I'd get server for him and he angrily demanded it be me. I was creeped out but went and grabbed some bread. When I came back, he said he liked my uniform, while ogling my chest, and asked if I could serve him any other way. I immediately backed up and my male co-worker stepped in. I continued to do my job but he kept grabbing at my arm or putting his hands on my lower back as I passed. I got a radio from my manager who told me to go find something to do in the back and don't come back up for a few minutes. Turns out he and my coworker told the dude to get the fuck out or they'd call the cops. Feel like this is made for me. I was 18 and was a customer greeter for a big retail chain in Australia. It was also COVID time so I had to focus on counting people leaving and entering the store and was in a barricaded square. This man walks up to me, about 21-ish, and just stares at me. No blinking, no words, just staring. I welcome him and he was high and stares a bit more. He then says he just had to come over and tell me how beautiful I am. I say thanks and turn back to doing my job. He says his name and asks for mine. He then asks if he can take me out for a drink. I say no sorry I have a boyfriend and this man straight up says, "I won't tell if you don't." I turned around and said yeah I am definitely telling him about this. He laughs and then goes back to staring. Finally he leaves but let me tell you I was shaking. I finishing 10 minutes later and walked to my car with my keys in between my fingers. I have never been so scared of someone in my life and I genuinely couldn't get away from him and had no way of calling for help. I knew he was on the ground sorting papers, on my knees. Male coworker came up and said, "You look good on your knees." Was a nursing student. Diabetes 2 patient with badly controlled blood sugar levels. Had his right leg amputated up to the knee, and a few toes on his left foot, including a few fingers on both hands. He was missing several teeth as well. All because he loved sugary drinks. I refused to give him squash with sugar. He could only get the sugar-free kind, as per hospital wards rules, as he was in because of uncontrollable diabetes. He picked up a glass and threw it full force at my head. I ducked. It shattered on the wall behind me. He did the same to another student not long after this. It hit her temple and she lost vision in one of her eyes and had to drop out of nursing school. I don't know if she ever regained it. He wasn't actually allowed to have proper glass drinking glasses, only the paper kind, but this wasn't told to the students/new CNAs, so we gave him proper drinking glasses just like every other patient. I work in a call center. I've had horny men say inappropriate shit to me on the phone. You are not calling a damn sex line. Sorry, just venting. I am an Uber driver and a male passenger asked if I was up for some further exploration. This was at 3 a.m. on a dirt road with no lights. I was unfamiliar with the area. He then asked me what I was into sexually and told me to name my price. He kept pushing me and I played dumb the best I could be. See, I was terrified. I went 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, reached his destination quickly and then declined. He got out, thanked me and said he just had to try. I was 16. A man handed me a business card and told me to call him that night. I told him I was 16 and he grabbed his card and took off running. Security never caught him, but he wasn't allowed back in our store for a while. Maybe not the worst, but the first thing that pops into my head was when I worked at the customer service/cigarettes and lottery tickets area at a grocery store in my early 20s. This ancient old man used to come in like once a week and offer to help me put on a bikini or invite me to cuddle with him under a blanket. It was pretty gross, but fortunately there was always a counter between us and he was frail as fuck, so I could have taken him down if I need to. Lol.